Yeah. Now sort of follow it over this. Okay, ready?
Mm-hmm.
This is the model 1928 A1 Thompson submachine gun. This one was made in late 1941 by the Auto Ordnance Bridgeport plant. Now, follow around this one. Thought we'd be good in following up the video that I made on field stripping and reassembly of this gun. This time looking at the rear handle assembly, otherwise known as the frame assembly. That has a lot of the inner workings and mechanics of the gun. First is, if you've seen the field stripping video, know we're going to start off, the magazine is already out, we'll start off and make sure that there's no cartridge or anything left in the chamber. We'll have the actuator bolt all the way forward. The selector switch set to full automatic and the safety switch set to fire. We'll turn the gun upside down on a flat staple surface, and then I'm going to push in on the frame release button. That's the frame release button. We're going to just push it in. I kind of follow it around. You push that down and then slowly just push the frame back. When it comes back a little bit, we'll punch the trigger and just bring it off the end gently. Now, for the purposes of this video, we're going to concentrate on the frame assembly, which is this group of parts. That comprises the rear handle and its screw, the trigger, and the trip that goes over the trigger, the disconnector switch, which is attached to the trigger, the sear lever and the sear itself, and also the rocker that helps control the semi-auto versus full auto fire. This also has the magazine latch on it. We're going to take a look at the parts, all of these parts. With this World War II part, it looks like it actually went through some action. It has a lot of dings and scrapes and gouges on, especially down here, like it was slammed down to shoot. But all of these parts still work. They're very high quality. And we're going to take a look at how we get to all of these parts. First, we're going to take the frame assembly and just turn it upside down like that. We're going to take a screwdriver. So we've got the rear handle screw loosened, and it just comes off very easily. If you look on the rear handle, it'll have a little S on it or an AOC, which designates the origin of manufacture, either the Savage Company or Auto Ordnance Company. Once the handle's off, have a good look at all of the metal works of the frame assembly. Now what we're going to do is take all of the moving parts out of this and take a look at them individually. We're going to start by removing the safety switch and the rocker, or the selector switch. I'm going to embark on actually a piece of the actuator and bolt assembly, the actuator itself, which makes a handy tool. Fits nicely in your hand, and that little edge right there works just right. It's pointed out in one of the World War II training films for doing some of these maneuvers. Let's start off by taking the rocker assembly out and move it up just a little bit, please, camera person. That's Mrs. Patrick M615. You see that a little better? This area. Alright, that's the rocker switch, or the fire selector switch. Now we're going to take the actuator edge and just pull down on that little arm. That's the pivot plate, and that arm acts as a spring to hold it in place. We're going to pull that down and then push the pivot plate down and out. pivot plate comes out, and the rocker, or the rocker pivot comes out, and then the rocker itself, we'll go over these in a little more detail later, which has the little notch on it, also comes out. Next, we're going to take the safety switch and put it about halfway between safe and fire, and that actually pulls this arm of the pivot plate down a little bit. We'll use our actuator again and brace our thumb against this. I always like to take the rear handle off before you do this. If that happens to slide off, it won't gouge a nasty streak in your otherwise really good walnut woodwork there. So we're going to brace our thumb here and pull this down and then push the safety switch through. And the safety switch just comes out like that. Next, we're going to take the pivot plate itself out. This pivot plate that holds those two parts in is going to come out completely, and that'll free up the trigger, disconnector, and sear assemblies and all of their springs. Now, to do this, we're going to simultaneously put pressure on these two projections right here that are the end of the pivot. We're going to put one thumb on one and the other thumb on the other and just simultaneously put pressure on it until the pivot plate is lifted up just a little bit like that. Then we're going to take the base of the thumb and fourth thumb and put it along the sear and trigger. Put some pressure on that because they have springs that are pushing them up. And then we're going to use the fingers of our other hand and just pry the pivot plate out. And there is the pivot plate and the arms that were holding the safety and the rocker in. Put that aside. Once the pivot plate is out, all the internals of that right there can be just easily dumped out. And that is the trigger and its spring, the disconnector and its spring, which sits on the trigger. We'll take that off independently in a minute. The trip, which is the magazine trip. When the magazine last cartridge is fired, that flips up and pushes a little projection up on the magazine that will hold the bolt back. And then the sear and sear lever. It's this posterior edge of the sear that keeps the bolt from going forward. And when the trigger is pulled and the series of levers split so that goes down, then the bolt can go forward and engage the firing. The only thing left on this is the magazine release. Now, this has a bad reputation of being very difficult, and it is a little more tricky than most. And this does not need to be taken off for routine cleaning or probably even ever. But if you have a need to it, if you're wondering about the parts damaged or there's too much grit in it for it to work right, you can just pull the lever forward like that. You can pull it a lot more forward without the pivot plate there. And then we're going to push on that little projection bulb there. And it lifts that out. Then we're going to continue to pull the spring back a little bit like that and ease out the Now that spring just cleared, and then we let it unwind a little bit and then just lift it out. Now of all the springs, every part just about has its own spring. The trigger, the sear lever, the sear, and this has its own spring, but this is a much more specialized spring than the rest. It has two little projections that have to be positioned just right, and we'll go over that on the reassembly. Then after that's out, we have the bare frame with no other moving parts in it. This houses the most of the mechanics that makes the Thompson work the way it does.